Good morning, Comrade. You're listening to WHIVLP New Orleans 102.3. This is your weekly Good Morning, Comrade. Jeff in the saddle today. We also have a very special guest, Mel Buer from The Real News, from Working People Podcast, and just a great friend to have. What is up, Mel? How you doing? What's going on?
I'm good. I'm hanging in there. Just another day in the life.
Yeah, just a day in the life. And we wanted to talk a little bit about you were doing some amazing documentation of the protest that took place a couple of weeks ago at the DNC. And for people who don't follow Mel on Twitter or Instagram or Threads or whatever it is, Mel has been doing amazing work covering stuff for the last several months of the college protests that were happening at the end of the last term, that were happening in terms of anti-genocide protests taking place in Gaza, committed by Israel, and now most recently the DNC protests that were taking place in Chicago. I guess, do you want to sort of talk about that a little bit? And I guess first introduce yourself to our audience, and we can kind of get into it.
Yeah, my name's Mel Buer. I'm a staff reporter for the Real News Network. I have been a movement and labor reporter for full time for at least the last 4 or 5 years, covering the labor movement and movements across the United States, most notably in the Midwest, and then most recently in Southern California.
Yeah, long-time listeners remember the last time we had Mel on, we talked about the train strikes that took place, or the near strikes, the contract white knuckle showdown that eventually ended up getting settled and kind of stomped on by the Biden administration.
Yep. In 2022, ancient history at this point.
I know, it feels like a million years ago, doesn't it?
It really does. It really does. But yeah, so went to the DNC with the Real News Network, and we had pretty good breadth of coverage from both inside and outside the DNC. And I spent my time on the ground at the protests over 5 days, from Sunday to Thursday night. So
that sounds exhausting, by the way, just being out there all the time at all hours of the day with thousands of people surrounding you.
It was pretty exhausting, but worthwhile. I think I had a good time. I met up with a lot of independent journalists that I've worked with in the past, or that, you kind of work alongside digitally on the internet. We got a chance to kind of work together in person in Chicago. And so it was really a wonderful experience to be able to be out there and tell a piece of the story of what's been going on. So,
yeah. And I love Chicago just generally. It's just
me too. City. Yeah. It's a good city. Yeah. I'm excited. I was excited, and we had a really good time, and I think all of us came back absolutely exhausted, but it was definitely worth going for sure.
So I guess to kind of start us off, just in terms of the protests themselves and the actions that were taking place, can you just describe a little bit of like what was going on there, who was organizing them, and sort of like what was the sort of like build up to this whole situation at the DNC? Yeah,
there was a major march and rally every night, except for Tuesday night. So Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday there was a separate group that did another protest. Wednesday night and Thursday night, and there were various coalitions that put together these marches. The first night was a reproductive justice march that was put together by a lot of pro-choice abortion advocate groups. that also had tied into sort of like reproductive rights are also important in the cause for Palestinian liberation. So there was some really fantastic speeches and conversations around what's happening in Gaza is not only a wholesale genocide, it's a reproductive genocide. The amount of small newborns, mothers being murdered
Yeah.
is a big part of the conversation. So that was part of it. Monday night was probably the largest march of the week, the march on the DNC. Over 250 organizations in a coalition put together this march. Tuesday night was a more leftist, sort of radical, anti-imperialist group of about 150 squared off with police outside the Israeli consulate in downtown Chicago on Tuesday. Wednesday was the Chicago Coalition for Justice in Palestine, which was, a lot of the Palestinian families that live in and around Chicago came out to that one, and then a final march on the DNC on Thursday. So there were a lot of different groups that were represented. Pretty much all of them kind of came with the same sort of goals, which is to say the DNC is happening in Chicago. And just because the Biden administration has stepped down from campaigning does not mean that there isn't still a message to be sent to the newer now Harris campaign. And so the idea was, this conversation needs to continue. We're asking for a ceasefire and we're asking for an arms embargo in this conflict, genocide. And we aren't going to leave the streets until we get it, was essentially the messaging there. So thousands of people came out. Yeah.
So, and when you think about this, and there was a lot of like, I guess people who in this is like one of those sorts of things where, people who are already like ready to like kind of crap all over these kinds of protests or whatever will come out and they'll be like, you see, we didn't have another 1968, so there was absolutely no moving of the needle or anything like that else like there. But it seemed to me that there was definitely like a wide and broad swath of people that did show up, not just from the city of Chicago, but came to Chicago to participate in it. Can you talk about like some of the kind of folks that showed up and like some of the crowds that were there?
It was intergenerational, interfaith, people of different politics, differently abled. I mean, it was a wide coalition of individuals who showed up both from within Chicago and from outside of Chicago. Many reports of buses coming in from as far west as California, as far east as New York. So, folks came and showed up. And yeah, man, I hate
that when people make those kind of like assertions about, well, this is not exactly like connected to something that happened 50 years ago, so it must be a failure, right?
There's different conditions that led to 1968. I mean, there's some parallels that you can draw, but one big thing is that, from my understanding, the reason that 1968 was such a sort of watershed moment in American political discourse was particularly because you had the Chicago Police Department brutalizing protesters on primetime TV, which, as you and I both know, and as your listeners obviously know, is kind of par for the course in the last 5 years. Unfortunately, that we just have more instances of seeing a militarized police force act against protesters, which is an unfortunate reality. I think also, I will say that, as an observer, the crowds were not as big as I was expecting them to be. And there are a number of different reasons why that could have been the case. I think probably the crowds probably would have been bigger if Biden was still campaigning and had made it through the nomination period within the DNC. We might have seen bigger crowds then. But generally speaking, there were still thousands out there. It wasn't tens of thousands, but there were still thousands in the streets. And there was still a lot of discourse and communication all over the city about the Harris campaign's complicity in the Biden administration's treatment of Israeli war crimes, essentially.
Yeah.
And you had groups of protesters for the entirety of the DNC standing at entrances to the security perimeter outside the United Center, holding noise demonstrations outside of restaurants where representatives are eating. They located what they thought to be Harris's hotel and held a noise demonstration outside her hotel. So, everywhere you went in Chicago, you had groups of dedicated demonstrators really kind of bringing the focus back to the genocide in Gaza. And also from within the security perimeter, you had the uncommitted movement of delegates who were invited to attend the DNC, holding a sit-in in order to try and secure a Palestinian American speaker on stage, which ultimately didn't happen.
I wanted to actually ask you about that. So I don't know if you would I imagine you might have gotten the opportunity to sort of speak to some of them. I know that there was again some people who were again inclined to be critical of these kinds of protests and actions or whatever anyway, who were being like, what do they just want? They just want a speaker and nothing and shut up. Of course, that wasn't the case. Obviously, the uncommitted movement wanted to have some kind of representation at the DNC, but like also the message that they wanted to send was to end this genocide and free Palestine.
Well, and even if the remarks were vetted by the campaign, which the speech would have been, they still didn't allow the speech to go forward. And I believe the speaker that they had put forward gave her speech at the sit-in outside of the United Center. I was not within the security perimeter at any point, so I'm pulling from reporting from my colleagues. But as far as everyone's concerned, it was a pretty solid supportive speech of the Harris campaign. The idea here is you have released Israeli hostages holding speeches. You have members of the military who have been given a speaking slot at the DNC. And there's no Palestinian American representation on that stage. Which
it's a pretty clear message, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. And it pretty clearly outlines the party's priorities in terms of what messaging they want to elevate. And now after Harris and Waltz have done their first CNN interview, you get an even bigger sense of the policies under a Harris administration at this stage will not change.
Yeah, and that was also very clear on Thursday night when Harris herself gave her speech, and she ruled out the idea of an arms embargo to Israel. She wanted the most lethal fighting force in the history of the world or whatever, just like saying all of the extremely right-wing things that like that like you expect to hear from. I mean, again, this is the kind of like oh wow, surprise, the Democrats are like the Democrats are demonic monsters too. But like it is a little bit it does kind of like hit you in the face a little bit when like these people who are just like you have to vote for the Democrats because they're like the good guys and they're the leftist of the two or more left of the two parties or whatever, which like I don't even necessarily disagree with, but like the grounds by which this whole thing is set, the parameters are so narrow that like you get again it's the Hitler versus 99% Hitler thing, you know what I mean?
Right. Well, and plenty of folks over the decades have pointed to our two-party system as really just kind of being two sides of the same coin. The goals are the same. The messaging is different. How are you going to appeal to a wider voter base?
The point is not to.
Well, in order to accomplish this, essentially the same political and economic goals, which is upholding our capitalist system, which is, maintaining power in the hands of as few people as possible, giving folks the illusion of choice. I mean, we could go on and on about it, but, the reality is the protesters on the ground in Chicago saw right through that shit. Pardon my language. And they understand that the pressure campaign needs to continue. And so, I think a lot of folks who were discouraged from just watching the DNC coverage, I would encourage them to, go to the Real News YouTube, go to Status Coup News, go to Unicorn Riot, go to In These Times, and really kind of go through the coverage that we had of the movement outside the fence, to see that there is still hope for the movement for Palestinian liberation. It is very strong, and, very focused in a way that a lot of movements in the last, 15 years have sometimes not had the same sort of strength and focus. So, I think it's great, and it gives me hope. And I came away from the DNC with a slightly different thought process about where we are at. And
you want to talk about that? You want to talk about that thought, like that, what that changes?
I'm sorry.
I said, you want to talk about what you thought coming in, and then maybe what came out from.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I didn't really have any thoughts about what exactly that was going to look like coming in. It's my first convention that I've covered as a journalist. In previous election years, I really didn't spend a whole lot of time thinking about the national conventions. The conventions themselves are sort of this, no matter what side you're on, they're always a bit jingoistic and cult-like. It's entertainment for the party. I mean, it's not necessarily, it's just kind of like this three-ring circus of our politics in a lot of ways. Going into it, though, I think having this sort of focus of, okay, what is the movement for Palestinian liberation doing outside of the DNC? What are these various organizations that have a vested interest in improving society somewhat? What are they thinking about? How are they using pressure points outside and inside to be able to further that conversation? And just going in with those questions and having those questions answered over the course of 5 days, just by seeing what the sort of mass march action did in terms of bringing groups together, in terms of generating conversation, in terms of generating national conversation, all of that, I came away with it thinking, the turnout wasn't as big, but by many metrics, it was a success. And hearing from other journalists in recent conversations about how these marches, you could hear while you were waiting to get into the United Center, you could hear the roar of the crowd from where they were. People could see these demonstrators. The conversations within the DNC, still people talked about the protests, right? So in terms of those like metrics of success, people noticed you, and it generated conversation, and the folks who were perhaps uncomfortable leaving the United Center and having to be faced with protesters who are reading off the names of murdered children since October 7th, Palestinian children, a bit grim to be able to see the look on their faces, and see the pains they had to take in order to ignore these protesters as they walked past. And,
oh my gosh, during the sit-in, when you would see some of these, like, some of these people just walking by, just watching as, these who are leaving, who are just like putting their fingers in their ears to
hear
the protests.
I mean,
I mean, you would think it's shocking, but like it's like one of those things that like you kind of like think about your like, not even like a history book, because history books don't have this kind of stuff in them, but like just these images of like like these like pretty like racist images of the past, and it's just like, this is the person that was like yelling at the black children who are trying to go to school to integrate schools or whatever. Like you're that person, you're that monster, that demon who was lucky, I guess, enough to be nameless.
Well, I think when confronted with the really horrible realities of what's happening in Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank, a lot of folks don't really know what to do and how to deal with that uncomfortability. You would hope that they would turn inward and find some sort of empathy there, recommit themselves to the movement that is trying its hardest to end this horrific conflict, right? Yeah. And doing what they can from within this empire in order to pressure the people who have the ability to stop hostilities.
or at the
through
very
their
least,
influence. Yeah.
or at the very least, like expect like a little bit more from the politics that we have, like demand a little bit more, other than like, well, we need the Democrats to win to fend off like the Trump oblivion or whatever the hell, and like that's the only thing that the politics that this country are capable of is just fending off like whatever ridiculous disaster or whatever the Republicans are going to throw at us, and the Democrats are just the only thing that can protect us and shield us from that, and like anything else is being greedy or whatever. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I don't
It's so gross.
I don't know about you, but I'm the type of person who's politically engaged in um creating a world that is much better than the one that we live in currently.
Yeah, 100%.
And using the tools at our disposal in order to do that. But I think, a lot of people are engaged a little bit more cynically or have different goals. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, it was a good time. I'm really glad I went. Got knocked around by cops a little bit and spent a lot of time on my feet. I think I averaged like 16 or 17,000 steps a day for 5 straight days, but it was good. It was a good time. And I'm glad that I had the chance to go and represent the real news and put out some good stories.
Yeah.
So,
Some really good stories.
yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll appreciate the work on that. You mind if I like move on to maybe something a little bit related, but perhaps different? I actually was listening to the most recent episode of The Real News that you guys just put out recently, and you were interviewed actually several people from the the labor coalition for a ceasefire. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Since October 7th, but really a long time before that, there have been various a lot of rank and file groups, but also groups that are kind of created and maintained by international leadership, as in like the UAW, for example, that have been organizing pretty consistently for prior to October 7th. It was something akin to like BDS movement or for sort of cessation of occupation and the ending of the apartheid in Israel, Palestine, right? And since October 7th, a lot of those groups kind of coalesced to create what is broadly sort of called the Labor for Palestine Coalition, essentially. And these rank and file groups come from various locals all over the country. And there's a pretty tough, rough and ready Chicago coalition for Palestine that is comprised of a lot of member groups, but quite a few CTU members, and the Chicago Teachers Union, and so the organizing has been for a permanent ceasefire in this current conflict, but also now for an arms embargo and end to all military aid to Israel in order to continue to ramp up the pressure towards furthering the cause of Palestinian liberation. And these are groups like UE, like the UAW. There's a bunch of, member organizations that signed on to a national public letter to the Biden administration. I think there's 7 or 8 unions now that collectively represent like 1 million plus workers that are all pushing for an arms embargo, that are pushing for an end to aid to Israel. Because to be totally honest, and you can find this sort of data pretty publicly available, that the United States spends about $3.8 billion in financial packages and arms distribution to Israel, maintaining their defense structure or shipping them bombs or planes or what have you.
And another way of saying that is that this aggression, this war, this genocide that is taking place in Gaza right now, and also now in the West Bank as well, would not be possible without U.S. like this U.S. money,
U.S. money,
bombs, these U.S. aircraft, these
our tax dollars. Yes,
our tax dollars.
And a sizable chunk of the working class, sizable chunk of organized labor has coalesced and begun organizing in earnest over the last almost year now against this, right? Like the Allied Painters trades at their recent convention, like yesterday or the day before.
Oh, yeah, Jimmy Williams. I was just about to
Yeah,
go there.
was talking about, removing pension investments from military contractors and other Israeli companies, right? There are college campuses across the country that are still experiencing student encampments, many of them run by unionized graduate students, and undergraduate students who are starting to disinvest from their endowments and of those of that nature, their investments from Israeli companies or military contractors that are directly profiting off of the death of 40 plus thousand people. Yeah, I mean, and so organized labor has a really unique part to play here. And that was the conversation that I was having with members of the Chicago Palestine Coalition, was that not only do the organizing skills transfer really well in terms of calling up a large number of people to support physically these events, but also to use those organizing and messaging skills to, and their place within the labor movement, which is currently enjoying a little bit of a better standing among the Democratic Party, to really kind of open the door to those conversations and continue that pressure campaign at multiple levels. So
Yeah.
really
Let me
fun to
tell you,
talk to them.
let me tell you something. I was on some of those. I remember like the dark days. I was on some of those old like Labor for Palestine calls years ago, back when I was with the teachers unions, and we were talking about like this has been a part of the strategy for years and years and years to get unions to divest from these Israeli funds, and now seeing national leaders like actually speaking at the convention talking about divesting, like this is some like actual real momentum that this movement has been able to build over. I mean, it's taken several years and it's taken a lot of organizing, and obviously, I mean, there is a lot of, this is I mean, at some point, like leaders like Jimmy Williams can't hide their eyes anymore, and you can't be like, Israel's not doing a genocide right now. They're not just bombing schools and mosques and hospitals and all these other things, like neighborhoods and refugee camps. Like people who are leaders in the labor movement who have an interest in their members, like they members have connections to this work. Like these are working people in Palestine, and they
Right.
have connections to working people in America. None of this is happening on an island.
Right.
But it's really great to see that the momentum that has been building over the last several years.
Yeah. It's a shame. And I really want to make sure that these words are as heavy as possible. It's a shame that it took the opening salvo to a, new heightened brutal stage of a genocide and apartheid state occupation for some people to kind of turn around and begin to support this movement. But its mobilization after October 7th would not have been possible if not for the years and years of work that went into slowly building these coalitions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when the moment called for it, these groups sprung into action, and this is all of these. It's not just the organized labor, though it has a part to play, but it's, if not now, and Jewish Voice for Peace, and every single Palestinian liberation movement organization that has been building sort of these conversations for many, many years / decades. This is a moment that hopefully at some point the war criminals in office will open their eyes a little bit, or at least be unable to turn away from the nightmare that continues to unfold on a daily basis. But yeah, I would say, I think it's really important that if you are a member of a union and you are part of a coalition that cares about this kind of stuff, to continue to do the work, and continue pushing individual and national leadership to join on to this call for an arms embargo. Because
talk to your shop steward, talk to your local president if you have a relationship, talk to whoever it is.
Yeah,
just
send
to
off
kind of
letters,
like
talk to people. Because those internal pressure campaigns are what bring a lot of those international and national leadership on board and are willing to put their neck on the line for that. So it's important. It's important. This is the key issue of our lifetime, the key struggle, one of the, but top five. I don't
It's a
know.
pretty big one. It's a pretty big one. I mean, like it does at this point essentially feel like. I mean, I don't want to be like too sloppy or with it or whatever, but like it does seem like our generation's Vietnam at this point.
Certainly, yeah. This is the key struggle for the anti-war, anti-genocide movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And folks are in it for the long haul. And I look tired and I'm a little deadpan today, but I am really serious when I say that, what I saw at the DNC, outside the DNC, and what I've been seeing in Southern California with all of this organizing is groups of extremely passionate, extremely dedicated, extremely focused individuals who are in it for the long haul. And that is unreal. It's great to see. And it's really wonderful to be able to tell those stories and to witness what this movement is doing.
Yeah. And there's definitely, if you look again, sort of like generation upon generation. I mean, I came of age during the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, which, that was when the anti-war movement, which, I mean, obviously it didn't come from nothing, but like this was something that was almost like a re-emergence of it for one of the first like major times since the 1960s and 70s, since a lot of that stuff. And then you sort of see how, because I'm not getting any younger, you see how over the years that there's some of those same faces that are still there, and then that there's bringing in of younger people, bringing in of really new. I mean, again, it's the circumstances, like you said, are extremely unfortunate that this has to be, in response to the horrors that, American and Western imperialism, is inflicting on the rest of the world. But I guess in terms of a silver lining, like seeing that there's a much more seasoned anti-war movement, a much more experienced anti-war movement building up, that can actually potentially challenge these malevolent forces that have that ruin that destroy the world, really.
Yeah, it's I'm optimistic.
Mm-hmm. I mean,
I'm
as cynical as anybody when it comes to a lot of these kinds of things. Like I can definitely be like, what are you doing in some kind of sort of situations, but like in terms of general broad trends, I'm just like, it's hard not to be hopeful and positive, optimistic in the broad sense.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So anyway, I guess that could be a good place to leave it. Mel, tell the people where they can find you, where they can read your work or see any of your fantastic reporting.
Yeah. At therealnews.com, you can look me up by my name, Mel Buer. I'm on Twitter. Just look me up by Mel Buer. And then, I'm the new co-host of Working People Podcast. So I do primarily episodes on the contemporary labor movement, so organized labor and the contemporary sort of struggles that are happening today, with also a sort of thought toward trying to tie it to the legacy of American labor history. So lots of conversation there. Twitter. The Real News and Working People Podcast on the Real News. So check me out.
Check out Mel. We love Mel. Mel's fantastic. Thank you so much, always. And, appreciate you coming on Good Morning, Comrade.
Yeah, anytime.
Totally.
All right. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. For the union makes us strong. When the union's inspiration through the workers' blood shall run, there can be no power greater anywhere beneath the sun. Yet what force on earth is weaker than the feeble strength of one? But the union makes us strong. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever. Solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong. It is we who plowed the prairies, built the cities where they trade, dug the mines and built the workshops, endless miles of railroad laid. Now we stand outcast and starving mid the wonders we have made, but the Union makes us strong. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong. They have taken untold millions that they never toiled to earn, but without our brain and muscle, not a single wheel can turn. We can break their haughty power, gain our freedom when we learn that the Union makes us strong. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong. In our hands is placed a power greater than their hoarded gold, greater than the might of atoms, magnified 1,000-fold. We can bring to birth a new world from the ashes of the old, for the Union makes us strong. Solidarity forever, solidarity forever, solidarity forever, for the Union makes us strong.
Good morning, comrades. Now, this is Robert from the Good Morning Comrade show here on WHIV 102.3 FM. End all wars, New Orleans. And Jeff has got some really good content for you coming up. He's got some interviews. He's got some good stuff. We weren't able to link up this week, so I recorded a little something to fill the time. Trigger warning. It's going to be content warning, whatever. It's going to be death, violence, destruction. Not anything graphic, more graphic than you'll see on the evening news, but if it's Saturday morning and you're trying to enjoy your breakfast and just don't want to hear about small children and those who cared for them, murdered senselessly in what I've been told is the best country to ever exist on Earth, you might want to just, for the next 20 minutes or so, just fast forward through this or turn your radio down if you're listening terrestrially. So as we're all aware, there's been another school shooting, another mass shooting here in America. This happens all the time. This is just what we do here. In America, small children have to pay the price for our literally wrong interpretation of the Second Amendment. And they pay the price with their blood. If you haven't heard about the newest mass shooting, here you go. I'll lay it down for you. This is on a Friday. This is from CNN.com. Georgia was the 45th school shooting this year in the U.S. The 46th happened today near Baltimore. So you thought I was probably more than likely going to lead with the Georgia shooting, but no, we've got another one today. This is from Ashley Williams of CNN. And what has become at least the 46th school shooting in the U.S. this year, a 16-year-old student at a high school near Baltimore is in custody after allegedly fatally shooting a 15-year-old boy on campus Friday, authorities said. It comes after 4 people were killed in a high school in Georgia on Wednesday. The shooting occurred near Joppatown High School in Joppatown, Maryland, around 12:30 p.m. Eastern Time, in the first floor men's restroom. Hartford County Sheriff Jeffrey Gahler said at a news conference Friday afternoon. Authorities emphasized that the incident was not an active shooter situation. Joppatown is about 20 miles northeast of Baltimore. I thought that was a weird little thing to end your article on, your blurb that's 20 miles away from Baltimore, because when you start saying stuff like that, especially like the same thing with the Georgia shooter, when you start how far these places away from a metropolitan area, you're slightly trying to frame it as the reason why this happened is because you're near a metropolitan area, and that's just the kind of thing that happens near metropolitan areas, which isn't the case, and it's grasping at straws. But that's my whole commentary. That's to give the game away. That's where I'm gonna go to about how we're willing to blame everything and talk about everything under the sun except for the guns, except for the things that are actively murdering our children. So this is what we know so far about the Georgia shooting. Again, this is still from CNN. 14-year-old Appalachia High School student and his father, who were both charged in connection with the mass shooting at the Georgia school, appeared in court Friday, both declining to enter a plea to the charges against them. So they're charging the father as well. His father, Colin Gray, was arraigned on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. An arrest warrant alleges he provided his son with a firearm with knowledge he was a threat to himself and others. Now, the alleged shooter, Colt Gray, 14, was arraigned on 4 counts of felony murder and is expected to be tried as an adult. Following the Wednesday shooting that left 4 people dead. After the hearing, District Attorney Brad Smith said the teen will face additional charges, and a grand jury has been impaneled and will meet on October 17th. Now, I know I said a little something about the Second Amendment, and I just really wanted to hammer down, like, I guess for those of you who haven't listened for a very long time, with the limited time I have, I'll roll down my pedigree. I'm a gun owner. I am a law enforcement veteran, and I'm also a United States Marine Corps veteran. I know my way around weapons more than most people. I'm not afraid of weapons. I'm not irrationally afraid of them. I know they don't fire by themselves. But as we talked about when I was in the cops, when I was a sheriff's deputy, and then also United States Marine, there's no such thing as an accidental discharge. There's just no such thing. It's just you're not safely handling your weapon if you shoot somebody by accident. It's never point your weapon at anything that you're not prepared to kill. So I just want to to go back to the Second Amendment, which is brought up so many times as the defense of why every Tom, Dick, and Harry in this country needs a Armalite rifle, known as an AR, or other weapons of war, is because the Second Amendment says being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, I purposely left off the first part of the amendment. The first part before there's a comma before being necessary. Before the word being is not capitalized. And I know when you get on Papa and Mama's Facebook and you see their post, or you're getting into it with your buddies at work, and that's the part you never hear, the part that's never talked about. And it's a very important 4 words. And you can take that supercomputer that's in your pocket, also known as a cellular smartphone, and follow along with me. It's an easy 2-second Google search. And these 4 words are a well-regulated militia. So when you read the whole complete Second Amendment, everything changes. A well-regulated militia being necessary to secure a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. So, regulation involves government. That is implied. Militia is a armed group that is regulated. The closest thing we have to a well-regulated militia in every single state is the National Guard. The National Guard, who is under the command of the state's governor, fits the role of a well-regulated militia. You, obviously I'm talking in the royal you, I'm sure I'm not talking to my WHIV listeners, but you and your yokel buddies going out to Honey Oak Swamp or whatever. I've lost, but you know what I'm talking about. On the North Shore, there's the Honey Island Swamp. There's a gun range out there. It's the first thing I thought of because me and my yokel friends go out there and shoot. You and your yokel buddies, with the arms that they picked up from Cabela's or Sportsman's Warehouse or that they bought in a private sale, and they just love guns, walking around with their guns because Louisiana's an open carry state, are not, I repeat, are not a well-regulated militia. I do not understand how things got this out of hand. It's absolutely crazy. I'm going to read you another article. This is a straight-up opinion piece from Rex Hupke, who wrote this piece for the USA Today, and its title is Vance says school shootings are not a fact of life. I apologize. Vance says shootings are a fact of life. That's cowardice, not leadership. In the wake of a deadly Georgia school shooting, J.D. Vance, the Republican who incorrectly thinks he's qualified to be Vice President of the United States, said this Thursday at a rally. We don't have to like the reality that we live in, but it is the reality that we live in. I'm sorry, what? A 14-year-old student is suspected of using an assault-style rifle, reportedly a gift from his dad, to shoot and kill 2 Appalachia High School students his same age and 2 teachers while injuring 9 others. As with any school or mass shooting, there are victims well beyond those shot and their families and children and adults whose lives are forever damaged by the trauma. And Vance's response to the day after the tragedy is, this is the reality that we live in. Pardon my attempt at publishing profanity, but Vance can, and it's so silly that he censored himself. Vance can bleep right off if he's ready and willing to accept armed children committing routine acts of carnage in American schools is a reality that just has to be accepted. Okay. So, while hyperbolic and bombastic, this article is 100% accurate. But here's the thing. J.D. Vance wasn't wrong. This is one of those classic kind of MAGA Trump things where they're right by attrition and they don't fall down, they fall up. They get to the right place by going the wrong direction. But what he's saying is this is a reality in American society is 100% accurate. And I'm not a huge fan of Kamala Harris, but her saying that we don't have to live like this is the correct take. But this is where we're at, folks. Like this is not unnormal. This is not unusual. This is not out of the normal. This is the thing. This is the blood sacrifice. I want you to understand. This is a blood sacrifice that Americans, much like how we accept the genocide of Gazans, we've just come to accept it to protect our quote unquote freedoms. You know, FREDUMBS, freedoms. Or whatever. And from your social circles, you're going to hear the same old arguments, whether, if this person's given up on arguing, they're going to talk about, evil. They're going to talk about hopes and, thoughts and prayers and that. But the people who are still want to actively engage and try to justify where we're at in this country are going to hit you with things like, and believe me, because I've run through all these arguments from my social circles of, well, the gun didn't shoot itself. Or, we need to do more about mental health. Well, first of all, when you hear that kind of, and I know I'm setting up straw men, but these aren't straw men. These are scarecrows that are walking around in our society, and I know you people know them. But when you say things like, oh, the gun didn't shoot itself and we need to do more about mental health, ask what these people's, what is your opinion on universal health care? Oh, you don't want to do that because that's communist or socialist or whatever, so you don't care about mental health. And the whole gun didn't shoot itself thing, it's like, did the bullets kill those people or did the kids' mental health kill those people? The next kind of foolish arguments you're going to hear are about how, well, if he didn't do it, if he didn't do it with a gun, he would have had a knife or a bat. Or what if he would have run? What if he would have just driven a car in there and run them down? Okay, well, let's investigate. Let's take a look at those scenarios. Because the kids are not all right anywhere in the world. You all can remember what it was like to be 14 and be depressed and be weird and not know your place in the world and just feel like every moment you're living and dying. Remember what that felt like? Every child in the world feels like this, but not every country in the world has mass shootings. It's something that we do. And it's because of the guns. It's because they don't have the proliferation of firearms in other countries like we do here. So let's say that this kid was dead set on murdering people. So he can't. And let's say this was, I don't know, the UK, which is not a panacea, has its own insane problems. But let's say it was the UK. So he's not going to have access to a firearm. So okay, let's say he brings a knife to school. And I'm sorry to get graphic, and I'm sorry to get, again, Saturday morning, I understand. But let's say he brings a knife to school. But we have to talk about these things. We have to be honest about them. A 14-year-old child brings a knife to school with an intent on killing as many people as possible. If I'm going to be completely generous to that 14-year-old child in his killing ability, how many people do you think he's going to be able to kill with that knife before he's stopped? If I'm going to be absolutely generous, I would say 1 at best. He can maybe, from behind, stab 1 person in a vital organ. He's not going to get another one off. It's not going to happen. Somebody's going to stop him. So, 1, a bat, a stick, a club, some kind of bludgeoning device. Ain't no way. Ain't no way no 14-year-old is going to be able to sit there and bludgeon somebody to death. Okay, let's say he stole his dad's car and just ran kids down. All right. Well, that would suck too. But here's the thing about that. The things I described to you already, a bat, a knife, a car, they all have a primary purpose that does not involve killing human beings. A car will take you wherever you want to go. A bat, you can bring enjoyment to people's lives and enjoyment to yourself by playing a game of baseball. A knife can cut your food. That's its primary purpose. It's not to kill a human being. An assault rifle, an Armalite rifle, which is what he used, has no other purpose than to kill human beings. It has no other primary purpose, and it has no secondary purpose. Back to the car analogy. Okay, let's say he tried to run people down in the car. Cars are, in their manufacture, are highly regulated. In their manufacture, and they're highly regulated by the government of who's allowed to drive them and where. So if we have this much government regulation about a device, a car, a machine that is potentially very dangerous, but has a primary purpose to help society, why do we not ask yourself and ask these people who are trying to feed this line to you? Why do they not have the same? Why do firearms not have the same regulation and the same government oversight? If we're willing to regulate alcohol, cars, marijuana, all these things that have, maybe secondary harmful effects, but we won't regulate this. We won't put extreme regulations on this thing that has a primary use of only killing human beings. We can absolutely do better than this. We won't do better than this. If we were going to go off this train, it would have been during Sandy Hook. We would have veered off during Sandy Hook. I'm sorry. I mean, I hope I'm completely wrong. I hope that this is the one. I hope that the shooting near Baltimore today was the one. I hope that the one in Georgia was the one. I was hoping that Sandy Hook was the one. I was hoping that Combine was the one, but we just don't care. We love our gun culture more than we love our children. Hopefully Jeff will bring you something a little bit more happy than this. Enjoy your Saturday, y'all.
A young cowboy named Billy Joe grew restless on the farm, a boy filled with wanderlust who really meant no harm. He changed his clothes and shined his boots and combed his dark hair down, and his mother cried as he walked out, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town." He laughed and kissed his mom and said, "You're Billy Joe's a man. I can shoot as quick and straight as anybody can. But I wouldn't shoot without a cause, I'd gun nobody down." But she cried again as he rolled away, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town." He sang a song his own, he rode, his guns hung at his hips. He rode into a cattle town, a smile upon his lips. He stopped and walked into a bar and laid his money down, but his mother's words echoed again, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town." He drank his first strong liquor then to calm his shaking hand, and tried to tell himself at last he had become a man. A dusty cowpoke at his side began to laugh him down, and he heard again his mother's words, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town." Filled with rage, then Billy Joe reached for his gun to draw, but the stranger drew his gun and fired it before he even saw. As Billy Joe fell to the floor, the crowd all gathered round and wondered at his final words, "Don't take your guns to town, son, leave your guns at home, Bill. Don't take your guns to town."